what do you think are the most exciting VC opportunities in the next 3 to 5 years?
Well, definitely we see a trend in some major sectors, I would say. Fintech, again and again, we say this every year, we can't ignore this sector, even though it's really tremendously backed in the region. We still have some gap, and we need to back that gap. We still have innovations that are needed in that sector. It's like for fintech, we still don't have enough innovation in securitization. It's still, payment is still untapped in some places in the MENA region. So that's definitely a sector we're still looking at very deeply, especially that it has a good history on exit in the region in that sense, right? I would also really emphasize what we see in the region as the supply chain logistics sector. It's definitely a boring sector sometimes, but it's very, very scattered and kind of broken in our region. So there is a lot to do and everything to do in it. So having innovation now powered by AI to solve those tremendous problems are really needed. So we're definitely working on finding gems in that sector as well. Obviously, AI we cannot ignore, and I'm super excited that we're starting to see founders from our region innovating and taking the lead in the sector, still growing, but still new, which is very exciting as well. So that's something I believe we will see more and more funding showing in the numbers in the next steps in the sector.
What type of AI companies or AI applications are you looking at?
I mean, the Arabic language is very important in the region, right? And even though we have tremendous players in this market, Arabic is still coming from the region. So having that edge of leading that part is very important. Definitely in health tech. Is also very exciting to see how we are accelerating the path towards making patients happier and finding solutions faster. Fintech as well. If we look at a specific sector in securitization, this is actually a concept that exists from the times banks were created, and we still don't have this process digitized. And we still need to work on that as well. So I would say really in different sectors, as long as we're really coming in to bring a tremendous added value to accelerate the growth in that sector.
Yeah. Michael, most exciting opportunities you see?
It's good that I'm in the middle, so I can take some of Soumaya's points, and then hopefully I'll take some of yours as well.
And I'll build on both of you.
Exactly. We see each other too often, that's why we rehearse this. A few things to add, I would say. I think quantum computing is interesting as well. Although it's relatively early, but in the communication space, we're seeing some very interesting applications. Communication between satellites and base stations, securitizing communication is something very interesting, specifically in the region. I would say data centers. Obviously, with massive investments on the data center side across the region, we're looking at smart data centers, smaller form factors, data center cooling, energy management. Healthcare was mentioned already. I think from the biotech side, we've obviously made an investment on the cancer treatment side, which is coming from the region, which is really, really exciting. I'm not going to say AI, but I have to say AI because we just made an investment yesterday in an LLM company focusing on Arabic language.
Oh, there
very
you go.
exciting.
It's a common theme.
Exactly, coming from the region. So we're excited to seeing these technologies happening and growing from here, and these companies going global.
I'm going to add 2 more sectors to build on that, which is gaming and prop tech and infrastructure. I think is something that's significant in the region. But I'm also going to say that what I'm excited about is actually bridging a lot of the emerging market regions and bringing the ventures across from, again, Africa, Asia, and the Middle East, and the wider Middle East. We're looking at a few companies in Turkey and Pakistan at the moment. There's a real opportunity to have startups actually expand and utilize the market and consumer bases across the different regions, rather than just looking at it as Middle East as in its own right.
Yeah. Thank you. Soumaya, let's just bring in the macro. We've had a couple of days just talking about the uncertainty about the global outlook and just how sentiment has taken a bit of a nosedive, and maybe things are stabilizing now. How is that impacting sentiment towards the VC ecosystem in the Middle East right now?
Yeah. So definitely when we have a slowdown in the growth globally, it's also impacting the region. So if we think of exits, right, and M&As are major exits in the region, and we see international companies acquiring some companies in the Middle East. So that slowdown definitely makes us have a question mark on that, maybe slowing down a little bit of the M&As that we're seeing in the market. So that's definitely the first thing we think of when we heard the news in the fund. And then it's also very interesting to see how it depends on the sectors you invest in, right? So, for example, for venture capitals or for entrepreneurs that are working specifically in manufacturing, trade-dependent sectors in that sense, are the ones that are the most affected in that sense. So in our case, we invest more on like software, SaaS companies, but still we are affected because if those startups are actually having clients that are trade dependent, and this is when we're seeing some of the clients maybe limiting a little bit of their tech spending in those uncertain times. Those are the things that we're directly seeing maybe in our friends or portfolios, friends or companies up and running in the market in that sense.
Michael, can you characterize how you expect 2025 to be in terms of activity versus prior years?
Yeah, definitely. And I think what is helpful on our side is that we invest over a 10 to 12 year cycle. So us as managers, we need to be very steadfast, even though markets can go down and up. Overall, the view on 2025 is relatively positive. I think where there is uncertainty is when it comes to liquidity, and specifically on the IPO side, and we're all kind of waiting for those large US IPOs to happen again, and seeing that liquidity go back to the LPs and that reinvested back in the venture capital space. But overall, I would say if I speak to the investors we co-invest with, our peers, obviously our LPs as well, the sentiment overall is relatively positive. I think where there is, I would say, opportunity is a collaboration between regions. What we're now seeing more and more is that talent is not just stuck in the US. It transcends across regions. Talent is moving back to the MENA region. And I think taking a longer term view, we came off a few years of heavy uncertainty, low liquidity in the market. Investing now from here in deep technology, in very impactful technology that is now going global from here, we're very bullish on the remainder of this year.
Yeah, it's an interesting point about the tech that's being created here but has a global footprint, right? And that's different from how it was in the past.
Absolutely.
Alina, do you have anything to say about just sort of this setup this year, sentiment, and also the fact that the backdrop also in this region is one of lower oil prices? Is that going to have ramifications on certain sectors as well?
Yeah, I think the point of departure for me is very much that Middle East and the wider Middle East is at an inflection point. It is not necessarily, from a private sort of market perspective, it's at about a 3% growth rate, but it's actually growing faster than most of the other regions. And if I think about the types of regulatory reforms that are happening here in the region, the establishment of the fiscal hubs, for example, such as the QIFC in Qatar or DIFC or ADGM, for example, as well as the intentionality behind the allocators and how much funding is going in. What really struck me is that a lot of the sovereign wealth funds here in the region are actually investing both domestically and internationally. And if you look at, again, some of the regions where we invest, which is Africa and Asia, that's not necessarily the case, right? A lot of the funding is actually going outside of the region first before they're investing domestically. So that intentionality behind allocation of capital means that the Middle East is not just an exporter of capital, but also an allocator of capital. And that drags, or rather brings, a lot more of the investors, right, on the deployment side. So
it wasn't always that way, though.
Well, it wasn't.
Yeah.
But what's really exciting to see is that you have a lot of the fund managers that have established themselves here in the region are now starting their Fund 3, Fund 4. And then you have other fund managers, right, that are actually being attracted internationally to come to, whether it's Qatar or the wider region. Yeah. From again, an asset allocation point of view, you have that investment flowing in as well.
How would you say the Middle East VC ecosystem compares to other ecosystems around the globe?
That's a great question. And I think you need to meet the ecosystem where it's at, right? I think it's often, we compare, these things from a data point of view. I mean, if I think about US, for example, obviously we know it's a global leader in terms of VC. It has deep capital markets. It has an established pathway to exits, but at the same time, it has, very competitive deal flow. And, in order to differentiate yourself, both the GPs and the startups need to work extra hard, let's say. Whereas if you look at Southeast Asia, for example, it's an established growth stage market from a VC point of view. The government's actually putting a lot of money behind, again, policies, subsidies from a tax point of view, but also from an RD point of view. Singapore is a great example of that. But it has, let's say, relatively unstable exits at this point. All eyes are kind of looking at how the region is going to perform, and at the end of the day, it is about performance. And then, as I said, from a Middle East point of view, there's a lot of capital. There's a lot of talent coming into the region, as Michael was saying. That's an important piece for VCs to establish that.
Yeah. Michael, I know you also have a presence in Southeast Asia as well, so I'm curious to see the similarities or differences you see in this part of the world versus Asia.
Yeah, it oftentimes feels a bit like copy-paste, where there are a lot of similarities in that sense. I'm just going to riff on Alina's point for a little bit. I can't stress enough how important liquidity is for any emerging market.
Yeah.
And we've seen this in Singapore, where the Singapore Stock Exchange has had different programs over the years to help earlier tech companies list on the local stock exchange. And we're now seeing similar programs here in the region. So that's very, very comparable. And it's good to see that there is an understanding with the policymakers that not every single company is going to be bought by another company. So we can't drive our entire sector on M&A. We can't drive our entire sector on secondaries. So at some point in time, IPOs are going to be important as well.
Yeah.
You want to get retail investors involved at some point in this tech ecosystem in terms of liquidity. And we're seeing how important this is in the US.
Is the only way to get them involved via the IPO?
Not the only way, but it's one of the ways to at least get them involved and get them exposure. So that feels very similar to what we've seen in Southeast Asia as well. I think the other comparable I would say is the dynamic between the different countries. From our Asia fund, we've invested across Vietnam, Indonesia, Thailand, Philippines, Singapore, Malaysia, of course. And there's always this different dynamic between the different countries where at some point in time, Malaysia is the supply chain hub and Singapore is the fintech hub, and it kind of moves around a little bit. You're seeing similarities here where we're sometimes competing for similar talent and similar companies. I think where there's an opportunity where Southeast Asia have kind of figured out what is their niche. You see a sort of niche for Vietnam, and there's a very clear characteristic for Singapore as well. I think there's an opportunity for the GCC, for the Middle East, to think of what is our niche and where can we excel in.
Interesting.
And whether it is from an oil and gas standpoint, food security standpoint, manufacturing standpoint, supply chain, I think you have to find your niche and figure out what is our strength for the next 10 years.
Soumaya, do you see that happening in the region? Specialization 100%. By country?
100%. So actually we're really seeing the ecosystem of venture capital in the region getting more mature in a way. That's definitely something we notice. We notice in the quality of transactions, we notice in the co-investments that we see, the investment syndicates that we're seeing more and more. So the sophistication is definitely there. I'll definitely emphasize that point. And we're also seeing that the players are also joined by international players. So now we're really becoming more visible internationally. The number of investors that are coming and looking at companies in the region is growing very fast. Most of the rounds we are in discussion with, we have at least one player that is not from the Middle East wanting to be part of the round as well. Yeah. So there is that sophistication that is growing tremendously. And we're also seeing a desire for an economic nationalism in a way. So we're seeing more also things that want to be done here and created here for the region. It's for sure important to be global from day one, but there are a lot of case studies that we're seeing in the region that are big enough to still be exciting.
And still, international funds are setting their sights on the region, from private equity to VC. Yeah. Do you see that as competition or potential for collaboration?
100% potential for collaboration, because one of the challenges that we have is also later stage investment, right? We are the ones on the ground, we are the ones up and running, we understand the region, we understand the challenges of the region, we know how to assess the potential of some companies or offerings, but we also need support of making the companies global for very ambitious target and IPOs or M&As, etc. And we also need help in fueling the growth stage investment. And this is definitely where hands with international investors, we're just complementing the knowledge and the needs for each other's collaborations in that sense.
Can I just comment on that, actually? Because I think it's a very important point, and just thinking about, and it's actually a common point across different regions as well, which is, one of the things that I've seen is that there is a fragmentation in the entrepreneurial journey. And it's very hard for a founder to go from a concept or an idea stage all the way to IPO stage. There's so many stages in between that. And typically you have growth stage capital, private equity, you've got growth stage VC, then you have VC, and you've got really, really early stage VC. And what we really need to work hard on is actually to provide that integrated pathway, right? So the fact that we have companies or coming in at that stage, the fact that we need to collaborate with those enables more of an opportunity for more founders to actually reach that stage.
The main blockage is at the beginning, though, very early stage?
I think there are blockages, there's challenges at every stage.
Yeah.
As an early stage investor, I would say there's never enough entrepreneurs. So in terms of actually opening up the funnel of having more startups actually enter, because let's be honest, at that stage, the risk is really high, right? Something like 60% of startups will actually fail by the time they get to Series A. So if you have a broad enough funnel at that stage, you'll have more startups at Series A.
So it's interesting to say there aren't enough entrepreneurs. Do you find the same, Michael?
We didn't practice this question.
No.
I'm going off piste.
Yeah, that's all good. I'd say yes and no. I'd say if I look at the seed and Series A stage, I think we're blessed with a very, very healthy pipeline. It is not as much as we are seeing in Southeast Asia, but I would say it's a very healthy pipeline. I do agree that at the pre-seed and idea stage, we need to see a bigger pipeline. It's very, very important. Not only from a numbers standpoint, but also from a diversification standpoint. To Soumaya's early point, she spoke about supply chain as an example. Like, I would love to see 100 quality supply chain companies coming from the region. Yeah. Equally, when I see 100 logistics companies coming from the region. So I think that pipe needs to be bigger at the early stage.
Yeah. What do you think needs to be done, Soumaya, to sort of continue enhancing that pipe, to use Michael's analogy there?
We're actually seeing a trend on our side in the pipeline we have of deal flow of international companies expanding to the region as well. And not only coming to the region for funding, but also because they are also needed so they're coming from mature markets, they have good tech, and then they're part of the ecosystem, and then they're interacting with all parties, and it's a learning that is very interesting to our ecosystem as well. So I would say, when we say pipeline from the MENA region, we definitely include in it a very good percentage of international companies operating in the region that we consider as well as MENA, companies in that sense. So I would think that addition of fresh blood and that work together, all of us from different mindsets, different cultures, in solving problems that are global but very localized as well, is very exciting. We get excited when we see such companies actually surrounding themselves with the right teams from the region, targeted with super solid tech, and bringing so much value to their peers here.
Yeah.
I would want to add one thing. One of the work that we're all doing as ecosystem partners is really be in front of entrepreneurs. I always bump into either Alina or Soumaya we're co-hosting an event, we're doing founders breakfast, we're meeting them where they are. And it's so important that we're unable to sit behind our desk and hopefully deals come our way. It's really kind of being out there and meeting entrepreneurs as much as possible.
Yeah. Can I ask you, this is part of the world where sovereign wealth funds are very active in terms of driving some of the economic vision. To what extent do you think these sovereign wealth funds are playing a role in this deal flow? And, feel free to jump in, any one of you.
Yeah. So, a lot of us have sovereign funds in their cap table as funds, so as LPs on board, and it's exciting for us to have them because they are co-investors. This is the first comment that comes to my mind. We exchange deal flow both sides, but we definitely need them to support us in our stars and in the portfolio. So we get more excited when we have an LP that would bring that kind of value, where we can ask them questions of previous portfolio companies in the sector to educate ourselves and better assess our investments, or where we have a superstar in the portfolio and then they're growing too fast, and then sometimes, being a lead investor is important to bring, quality investors in the round that will help define the growth in an efficient way. And this is where, when you have wealth funds that are, up and running and hands on the ground, is very, very helpful. Some other cases as well we see where a company is very exciting. They have access to top-notch entrepreneurs globally just because they invest in later stage, and those amazing entrepreneurs are now starting something new. And so it's still too early for them maybe to put a ticket, but as a child fund, we can benefit from that when we are, interested in the sector, or can bring specific value, where we could have that proprietary deal flow in that sense. So for sure, it is one of the criteria that we also have for our LPs to have on board.
It's an interesting point, yeah.
Just to build on that, I think exactly what Soumaya said, but also I think there's incredible value in your LP, limited partner, in being a long-term partner. Venture capital is not a short-term game. You're in it, for decades if you're doing things right. And so having a partner, and we're fortunate enough to be backed by the Qatar Investment Authority, the QIA here in the Middle East, who have that vision, who support that vision, and who see the opportunity to actually grow beyond this current fund or the next fund, but actually grow with you as fund managers and as a team, because the markets will change, the trends will change, the ecosystems will change, and so having that partnership is incredibly important.
The one thing I can add from a slightly different perspective is a lot of the sovereign wealth funds, specifically here in the region, have global collaborations, and whether it is Microsoft or NVIDIA or any of the other big names, they tend to have, and I call this a kind of funky deal flow, where there's companies that you don't regularly see, but because they have such a global reach and all of these partnerships with universities, with R&D centers, we sometimes see deals that I couldn't even imagine, but because it's in their purview and it's too early for them, we at least get a quick look at really early innovative technology. Because they're a sovereign wealth fund, they see those things a bit earlier than us.
Yeah. Well, we've touched on exits in various formats throughout this discussion. Obviously, it is the North Star for many companies and startups. What is your outlook for exits and sort of IPO activity in the region?
Yeah. So,
sorry, and also just to add to that, how much is it linked to that being unlocked in the US as well?
Yeah. So we are very excited to see it, growing in the region. So the step and status we're at now is still better than all the previous years. So that's good, and that's improving, and there is a lot of traction, but especially for IPOs of larger cap and the ones that are kind of government link. This is what we're seeing. For specifically tech IPO, I think it's still rare in the region, but we're seeing definitely, desire, willingness, hope, with a lot of announcements to have also an SME IPO. We see that in the UAE and Saudi. I know that Qatar also have that in mind, and things will be announced. So there is the desire and there is the perspective for that. But as Rasmal Ventures, we definitely are really focusing on M&A. We really think that M&A is still going to be the major focus for the next, at least, visibility of our investment period, which is like 3 years from now. And so that's, I think, will be the driver still, with really, supporting the IPO mission in the region. I personally think as well that secondary is going to be playing a very important role. I see that it's still nascent in the region. We have maybe a couple of funds that are working on that and now starting to be up and running. I really hope that this could be accelerated and grow faster, because I really think the secondary market is super important now in the MENA region. We have a lot of, funds that, deployed already in the region that have their portfolio companies stagnant in a way, because we were in a very tough period, and now we thought we were going to have visibilities once, the global perspective is clearer in the US specifically, obviously, because it impacts the rest of the world. But we still have uncertainties now as well. So it's an extended uncertainty where VC funds that were investing for a while and have a portfolio in the MENA are really needing liquidity. And this is where I think secondaries could be really handy in this period. So I think Rasmal Ventures, I would have really supported as well a secondary fund at a certain point to solve those and to be really handy in those periods at this time. Yeah.
I'd say one thing to add there. This is also from experience in Asia. One of the most important things that drives liquidity is awareness. Oftentimes, and it doesn't matter if it's IPO, M&A, or secondary, those large buyers, and whether they are retail buyers, whether they are secondary funds, or large corporations buying companies, they need visibility on our portfolio. And for us, that means that creating a lot of awareness, and whether it is taking portfolio companies on roadshows across Asia, US, Europe, if that awareness doesn't happen, these companies are not going to get acquired.
Yeah.
So I think our job, not only as fund managers, but as entire ecosystem, is the moment we make investments, we need to create awareness for each specific company.
Be noisy.
Be noisy, yes, exactly. And we're good at being noisy. So, but it is so important, and we've seen this in Southeast Asia, where there are amazing companies, and then we go to the US to, for instance, a secondaries fund, and they say amazing numbers, but I don't know this brand.
Yeah.
Help us understand the business model. Why are they amazing in Indonesia? Why are they not in Malaysia? So, again, creating that awareness is going to be important for us as fund managers to allow these companies to get acquired or able to get secondaries or IPOs.
I would also say that it is also the responsibility of the other side. So when thinking about trade sales, M&A, large corporates. So the role of corporates is incredibly important. We spoke about sovereign wealth funds. We spoke about asset allocators and asset managers. But one thing that I see as a huge opportunity is for corporates to actually play a larger role. Here in Qatar, again, we've got a thriving ecosystem, but for example, in Indonesia, most corporates are actually piloting or doing some sort of commercial contracts or engagement with startups at seed stage, right? And so yes, the awareness, and it's not just our responsibility as VCs to actually go out there and sort of shop our portfolio and say, here are the startups you should partner with. The corporates should also be interested in innovation from day one, not wait until they're at Series B and de-risk from a technological sort of tech readiness level, but actually come and find out, talk to us. What is it that you're thinking about? What are your customers excited about? What problems can these startups help you solve? Because our doors are always open.
Yeah. Great. Okay, well, we've got like a minute left. And at the beginning of this, for those who stuck around, I did tease a big announcement. So I'm going to steal everyone's thunder and tell you what the announcement is. Our three panelists today, very excited to announce that they are launching the VC Association of Qatar. This is a really big deal. They're going to stick around and tell you more about it. But just to wrap this up, each one of you, if you could just tell me what this means for you.
Yeah. We want to unify, we want to, support and grow the venture capital ecosystem in Qatar. We want to have our ecosystem part of the hubs in the region. And this is definitely our incentive by joining hands to have this association together.
Yeah, for me, it's collaboration, collaboration, collaboration. In an ecosystem, you never stand alone. You stand with your partners, whether it's our peers, our co-investors, whether it's our limited partners, whether it is corporations that help our portfolio companies, whether it's government from a regulatory standpoint, it's all about collaboration.
At the heart of every healthy startup ecosystem is standards. And so establishing standards and benchmarks, because we want this region to be as good, if not better, than the global standards of what VC means for this region. So.
Fantastic and a great announcement. Congratulations, guys. Thank you so much. Thank you.